Well, welcome back. This will be part two of how to do an upper level track. In part one, we did show how to create like this plywood up here that was raised up. You can see the 3D view here showing that that's a plywood section that's all raised up. And now what I'm going to do is we're going to take and well, first let me point out one other thing that I forgot to mention in part one. I went up to my layers, to options menu to my layers, and I created another layer called upper base. Okay? And then what I did is I took this plywood section, I highlighted it, and moved it because it was on my default layer, and I moved it to that new layer called upper base. That way I've got 3 layers. I got 4 layers actually all together. 1 layer for the main level of track, 1 layer for the upper base, and 1 layer for the upper level track. And then I have my default layer, which is the layer that I like to use to work with. So let's get started at modifying this track plan here on our upper level. So first off, I'm going to need to change the working layer. I'm going to have to come down to the bottom of the screen here and select upper level because I'm going to need to select the track that's in the upper level. And here's where it's going to show that why it's good to have everything on separate layers, because if I moved over to this point right in here somewhere, I could actually end up, if I'm in the wrong layer, I could actually select some track that's hidden behind the plywood, and I don't want to do that. So by having everything on separate layers, I know that I'm only working with one layer. That's all I can select. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this section of track and I'm going to pull it out of place. Let me set my snap back to 1. And I'm going to delete it. I'm going to do the same thing on the opposite side. This one section of track right there, I'm going to remove it and delete it. Now in their place, I'm going to come up to my track menu and I'm going to pick the 031 modern switch, okay, or turnout. And I'm going to place that in there. Now you'll notice that these lines are solid. I now need to highlight it, right click on it, and come down to toggle overpass. Otherwise, in the 3D view, I'm going to see the terrain dropping from that upper level all the way down to the main level, which is what I don't want. Okay? Now I'm going to add the switch over to the other side as well. So I'm going to my turnouts, my 031, the right-hand turnout. And again, I'm going to change the properties of it. Oops. Toggle it to overpass. And now when I look in the 3D view, there's my switches on each side in place, no terrain underneath it. All right. So now I'm come back to our plan view, and I'm simply going to take and using my measuring tool, and I hope this works, I'm going to start over here at the left-hand switch, at the open end of that left-hand switch with my mouse right there. I'm going to use the measuring tool, so I'm going to hold down the control key, then press and hold the right mouse button, drag it all the way over to the other side, let go of the mouse button, and I'm going to say stock track. Now there's that track that just made that straight connection right straight on across. But again, you can see that that track is all dark colored. It's not highlighted like these other tracks are as an overpass. So now I need to take and select each of those track sections that I just put in. All right. Then right click on it and select Toggle Overpass. There we go. Now when I look at my 3D view, let me take and let's see, let's tilt this down maybe a little bit. You might be able to see it a little better. You can see there's the track going on across with nothing underneath it to support it. Okay. Now let's take and add some plywood underneath that. Just like a narrow strip of plywood underneath there. A 4-inch wide strip of plywood. So we're going to come back to here. Now, because our plywood that's here already is on the layer called Upper Base. I'm going to come down to the bottom of my screen to my layer selection, and I'm going to select Upper Base. Now that's the layer that I'm going to be working in. All right. Then I'm going to come up to the top under my Objects, Basic Shapes, and instead of a filled polygon, I'm going to go to a filled rectangle. Okay? And I'm going to come down here somewhere. It isn't really going to matter at the moment where I'm at. I'm just going to select a point and then drag it on across. Now you can watch the spinner up here in the top right corner, and you can see that the one dimension says 5 inches. So that means I went up a little too high, so I'm going to drop down. So now it says 4 inches. And I'm going to continue it on over so that I overlap each end onto the plywood, because you're not going to see that. It's all going to blend in together. It looks like I need to stretch this out just a little further. All I have to do is grab one of those red dots that's on there, make sure that my 4-inch doesn't change, and there we have it. But now that is automatically at a level 0. It's not at 12 inches in height. But I also need to give it thickness. Just like what we did with this plywood, I'm going to highlight it, and I'm going to say Action, Extrude. And before we made it 1 inch, so I'm going to make this 1 inch as well. Click on OK. And while it's highlighted, if you remember from part 1, we took and elevated this plywood section, and we went up and going up and said change height, and we entered in 11 inches. And then click on Set Height. Now we can't see the track that's there, but just like before, I can come down to the bottom of the screen, go to that layer, which is the upper level, and I can take and create a box this way to highlight it, come up to my Action menu, and come down and you select Move to Front, and it brings it to the front. Now when I go to my 3D view, you can see there's my plywood underneath that track. So that's how you can create an upper level in a totally different manner. And, you know, if I wanted to, I could sit here and add some dowel posts, you know, some dowel rods coming up from the base, coming up to the underside of the plywood. All I do is I would take and use the, well, let me just show you one of them. Go back to my plan view. Let's take and zoom in here a little bit. And let's go up to my, well, let's see. Let's go to the layer, default layer to work with this. Let's go to Objects, Basic Shapes. This time we're going to select Filled Circle. I select where I want the center of the circle to be, and I move out to create my circle. Now where's that circle at? If I go to my 3D view, well, it looks like we can't even see it because we haven't extruded it yet. So let's go back to there. We're going to select that again. We're going to say Action, Extrude. And I'm going to say extrude 11 inches because that's the distance from the top surface of the base to the underside of the plywood. And say OK. Now I can go to my 3D view, and right there, as you can see, is that post. Now, in the plan view, I see the circle here. I don't want to see it here because it's supposed to be underneath this strip of plywood. So I can highlight it, come up to my Action menu, and come down, and instead of like before we used Move to Front, well, now we're going to go down one more step and say Send to Back. Now you don't see it here, but it's still there in the 3D view. And all I have to do now is I can add multiple, I can actually take and just say copy that and add all the posts, as many posts as I want to have in there for my supports. And there you have it. There's your upper level. I hope this has been helpful and has answered anybody's questions. And if anybody has any other further questions about this, please feel free to message me.